Good morning and welcome to the 42nd biannual meeting of the Nature Photographers of the Pacific Northwest. And this is our fourth virtual meeting. We are really hoping this will be our last virtual meeting and that we'll be able to meet again in the fall, but we'll have to wait and see what the fall brings. My name is Colleen Easley, and I'll be your facilitator today as we hear from our invited guest speaker and conduct our image competitions. All of our attendees are in view and listen mode only, so there's no need to mute yourself. But when it comes to the question and answer period after the speaker or even during the speaker, feel free to type your questions into the Q&A panel. So it'd be a good idea to locate that panel now, the Q&A link on your computer. You'll find it at the bottom of your screen, and sometimes on a tablet, it may be at the top of your screen. You might have to roll your mouse down there to have it pop up. Please use the Q&A panel and not the chat function. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our founder, Larry Rosenkatter. Larry?
Hello and welcome. I'm so glad that you'll be able to find us and that your Zoom skills are such that you were able to conquer the Zoom barriers and join us today. As Colleen mentioned, this is our fourth virtual meeting, and there are 4 individuals who have been responsible for making these virtual meetings possible. And lest they be forgotten, I'd like to point them out and ask you on some occasion to thank them. Colleen Easley has been our leader, followed by Gerald Pumphrey and Mary Pinion and Bruce Miller. These are the 4 individuals that have made these virtual meetings possible. I certainly could not have done it. I know that there's at least one point on which we could all agree, and that is that nature photography is a wonderful hobby. And it's a wonderful hobby for many reasons, but one reason why it's such a wonderful hobby is probably something that is most often overlooked. There are quite a number of nature photographers who've taken their hobby and have taken this avocation and have changed it to a vocation and have gone full time. And these are the individuals who are on the forefront of the new technology. They're the ones who figure out how the new electronics and the new technology, what it's like and how to use it. They write articles, they write books, they make presentations to groups like ourselves. They lead tours, they take other nature photographers to places where it's particularly attractive for nature photography. And over the course of our meetings, I've actually counted up, we've had 34 individuals who would fit this category of being leaders. And they have made quite a contribution to our organization as well as to each of us. And today we have the 35th. We have the McDonalds with us, Joe and Mary Ann. And they do just what I mentioned. They write books, they have articles, they make presentations to groups, they lead tours, they have individualized instruction. Probably Joe has something that sets him apart. I wonder if Joe was not the youngest member of the founding group that founded the North American Nature Photographers Association. This is an organization which not many of us belong to, hobbyists and amateurs like myself, but virtually all of the people who are at this full time belong to this organization. And I suspect that Joe, if he wasn't the youngest founding member, he was probably among the youngest. So we're particularly delighted to have the McDonalds with us today and are looking forward to Joe's presentation. And we want to thank the McDonalds for not only being here with us this morning, but we want to thank them for all that they've done over the years and what they're doing now and what they're going to be continuing to do. So a big thank you from me and from all of our members. You make our hobby a much, much better and more interesting and more rewarding thing. So with that, turn it over to Joe and Mary Ann.
Well, Larry, thank you very, very much. That was a very, very nice invitation or welcome, not invitation, but introduction. And yeah, we were actually, as you said, some of the founding members of Nampa, and I'm actually a little younger than Joe, so I might have been the youngest.
Yeah, but the confusion there is I look so much younger.
But anyways, but we're so happy to be with everybody today, and thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning. We are in Pennsylvania at our home. We would have loved to have been there in person. We love doing these in person, but thank goodness for Zoom that we can do this with you. We finally have a sunny day here, so we've had to really put a lot of things behind us so the sun doesn't shine through our window, and hopefully all of our neighbors are outside, that we won't have trouble with some of ours, with them streaming and with our internet feed. And along that line, we do have a little bit of a delay once we start our PowerPoint program, so we'll try to keep up with the pictures, but if we get a little out of sync, we've asked Colleen to let us know, and Joe will slow down to keep up with the slides. As they also said, once we start the thing, I am going to try to monitor the Q&A section, that if you do have any questions during the presentation, I'll bring them to Joe's attention. I am his IT person today. So with that, I will turn it over to Joe.
Well, let me just add to Mary's comments there about our own appreciation for, one, the introduction, but also to have the opportunity to be here speaking to all you guys. And the program that I'm going to do today, when Larry, you said about educating, my whole point on these kind of programs is really to not just show pretty pictures, but to impart information. And that's to me is the most important part of this. Hopefully there'll be some nice inspirational pictures as well, but I want you guys to come away from this with some education, learning about things. And since it's recorded, I imagine you'd have a chance to review that again. And then I have some resource materials that would be available as well. We'll talk about that later on. So
with that,
that,
I'm going to start to share our screen, and it might take me just a minute to get everything set up. So bear with me, and here we go. Hang on a second here. And so just to make sure, Colleen, you can see the first slide for macro photography.
Yes, I do.
All right, then we are a go. So let me bring up my Q&A window so I can read it. And Joe, you are on.
So I can see if I need position. Okay, so in regard to all that, we're going to be talking about macro and close-up photography. And do I click or?
You can click.
All right. And my own definition for macro and close-up is really small subjects, not necessarily minute macro, but everything from like frogs and lizards and snakes on down, butterflies, grasshoppers, and down to the true, really small subjects as well. So that's what I'll be covering in this. And just to give you an idea of some of the macro subjects, we could be talking about details on fall foliage with the colors changing, or insects, or even things as large as a bullfrog, which in terms of macro is an animal that's bigger than a bird. And we normally don't think of like a chickadee or something as being a macro subject. But there's a lot of interesting techniques, or fundamentals, I think I should say, that people may not be aware of, that can really make a big difference in your enjoyment of macro photography, and more importantly, perhaps the production of it. One of the things that we will talk about will be using flash, and flash and macro photography can really be your friend for a couple of reasons. One, any movement is magnified when you're in macro. And if you're shooting living subjects, which is what I always do, they may move and move quickly. So flashes will freeze that action. And we'll talk about that in any number of different ways. But true macro photography might be defined as things that would be basically like 1/3 life size and smaller. So the confusion that some people have when they see a scale is you might see like that 1:2 or 1:1 or 2:1. If you consider that as a fraction, 1:2, well, that's half life size. If instead, if you can see on the bottom there, where it's 3:1, 3/1, it would be 3x or 3 times life size. So that's the terminology for true macro stuff. What we'll be talking about today, and what I wanted to mention as well, is please feel free at any time to ask a question. Mary will read it at that point. It'll completely destroy my train of thought. The program will cascade, but that's okay. I'm just kidding. Anyway, we're going to be covering magnification, depth of field, flash, backgrounds, some advanced solutions, and then some of the equipment that you might need. And I'm not going to go heavy into that, but some things that I think are really essential. When we think of true macro lenses, they basically range in a focal length grouping, if you will, of something like 50 to 65, 90 to 105, 180 to 200. But the point behind choosing your different lenses is what they will allow you to do compositionally. And if you're using a short focal length lens, like the 50 to 65, and I use Olympus, so that would be a 30 to whatever. The shorter the lenses, the greater your angle of view, the wider your view will be. And your working distance, which is really critically important, is going to be closer than it will on the opposite extreme, which would be like the 180 to 200 millimeter, where we have a limited angle of view. So it's very narrow, but we also have a greater working distance that can really come in handy. Now, I mentioned a second ago that we now use Olympus cameras, and they're the micro 4/3 system. So any lens that we're using actually is double the focal length. So for example, with this robber fly, which is only about 1 inch in length, I used a 300 millimeter with a 2x converter. So it was the equivalent focal length wise of 1200 millimeters. And it was focusing to a little less than 5 feet, which gave me, with this very wary type of insect, a full frame shot without the risk of disturbing it. I'm going to be showing a variation on this little schematic, if you will, a couple of times as I talk about lenses and what they're going to be doing for us. And the point is that we can get the same image size with any number of different lenses, a short lens, a short focal length lens, or a longer focal length lens, but your working distance is going to change. But the other thing that's very important on that, and probably more important at times than the working distance, is what do you want to include in the picture? If you want a very simple picture, one that is visually not very competitive, then you want to use a longer focal length lens, like a 180 or 200 macro, or in this case, I was using a close focusing 300. And I have a very narrow angle of view. So only my subject is in the frame, and everything else, there's nothing competing with it, if you will. Whereas here, I'm using a 7 to 14 millimeter. Again, with Olympus, that would be a 14 to 28. And I'm at 7 millimeters, 14 millimeters. And I have a wide angle of view. And that wide angle of view gives me a sense of place for the shot. I have a nice frame, but not frame filling, but certainly enough detail on that gypsy moth laying eggs. But it also gives context. You can see that there's a forest involved. And this would be far more useful for telling a story than just a close-up of the lens itself. And then we can go into really extreme macro, and sometimes you need some specialty lenses for that. I don't know if you guys are on, but this is a Laowa, goes to 5 to 1, I think, and difficult as all get out to use. A friend of mine loaned this to me. I used it once. I haven't given it back to him yet, but I'm anxious to do so. So hard to work with. It's really, to me, not worth the trouble. But for these little guys here, I used a little mini aquarium. So for those Daphnia and copepods that I just showed, I used a little mini aquarium here. And on the left-hand side, you can see that I had a focusing rack made by Really Right Stuff. And it was a lot easier to tweak focus back and forth with the rack than trying to do so with the focusing collar itself. And to give you an idea of how small those copepods and Daphnia were, that larva spotted salamander is only about 1 inch long. It's just recently hatched out of its egg. And those little white spots around that are those things that I showed you just a moment ago. A flip out screen for cameras that have that should be your friend, because with that flip out screen, you don't have to have your chin buried in the mud or bending over painfully. You could be squatting and looking straight down on the viewfinder. When I put this image up, I realized, look at my eyepiece. It is dirty as all get out. And what can happen there, we just discovered this recently, is if your viewfinder gets really dirty, it may, with a mirrorless camera, it may block the viewfinder that all you can use is the monitor. And it's like, why isn't my viewfinder working? Well, it's because, or I'm sorry, why doesn't the monitor work? Because the camera thinks that there's an eye behind the viewfinder, and that's not the case at all. It's just dirt.
And that can happen with condensation, everything.
And it can happen with condensation, or in my case, photographing out in the field in dusty conditions and not cleaning my gear right off the get-go. So here's a plant called a squall root. And again, it's illustrating the point that I'm making here, that with a short lens, we can have a broad field of view, or with the longer lens, we would just have a rather tight view of a subject. A Hepatica is a type of flower that is coming out early spring here in Pennsylvania, and shot with like a 180 macro or 200 macro. I certainly have enough depth of field to cover the Hepatica, but it doesn't give any sense of context. You know, where is that? Well, that same plant could be photographed with a 7 to 14 millimeter that focuses very closely. And in this case, I'm also using in-camera focus stacking, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but it really gives context to the shot. It's not, you know, it's a Hepatica flower if you know your flowers, but you also see exactly where it's living, whereas that other shot didn't tell anything in that regard. As you're shopping for lenses, the thing that always I found very annoying when I was first learning photography, if you will, is the minimum focusing distance that would be listed for a macro lens is from the film plane, or in this case now today, the sensor plane of the camera, and not from the front of the lens itself. So you might have a lens that says that it can focus to, that the working distance is 18 inches with the 200 millimeter, but indeed, it may be 9.5 inches from the front of the lens to the subject. And 9.5 inches in front of this blacktail diamondback or blacktail rattlesnake might be a little bit on the tight end. Now these, everybody can see me, right?
I think so.
So here is my friend, my little turtle. There he is. It's rubber, it's not real. Well, my point on this is that with things that you have at home, you can do an exercise similar to what I'm going to be doing now to really hammer home the ideas that I'm going to be talking about between working distance and angle of view. So for this particular example, you see that I'm at 19 inches at 60 millimeter, and I'm also at 19 inches with 420 millimeter. And look at the difference in those image sizes at that. Now, with my 30 millimeter macro lens at 7.5 inches at f20, I have a lot of angle of view here, but essentially, I wasn't quite accurate with my distance here, but at 420 millimeter, if I was around 45 inches, 47 inches away, I would have had the exact same image size with the tortoise as I do with the 30 millimeter, but my working distance is so much greater, and I have a very simple background, if that's what I want to have. So I've done a little series to show you this. And with that 7 to 14 millimeter, I'll show two shots of the same thing, one wide open and one closed down, as you can see on the right, where there's a lot of depth of field. And this was just done on our front porch to illustrate the points that I'm going to make, which again, I would encourage you guys to do as well, if you need any understanding on this. So here's a 30 millimeter, and instead of 1.5 inches from the front of the lens, 7.5 inches. And you can see at f22 or f16 that the background is still relatively discernible. So I would have some sense of place perhaps. If I go to 60 millimeter, which with my Olympus is a 120 millimeter lens, now I have 14 inches for that same working distance, but now my background begins to be a little bit difficult to really discern what in the world it really is. And if I go to, this was a 40 to 150 millimeter with a 1.4 converter on it, which makes for a nice convenient macro lens. Here I am 40 inches away, and that background, even closed down, is still really blown out, a bokeh background, if you will. Between these two?
Yeah.
Well, one is wide open, the other one's closed down. So one is wide open on the left, and the other one is closed down, but at this working distance, the background is still completely blown out. So just to review that then, with the same, or with approximately the same image sizes, we could be at 3.5 inches or 3.75 inches, almost 9 inches, and almost 20 inches, actually about 22 inches to get about the same on that one for the 420 millimeter. So as working distances increase with greater focal length, your backgrounds decrease and they become then a more simplified background, if indeed that's what you want.
Decrease in what?
Decrease in,
Talk to them.
what was the question?
I'm sorry, I just thought it was a little bit that the backgrounds decrease in sharpness.
Yeah, and also in the amount of area that's being covered. So again, although I talked about that a moment ago, here's the graphic for it. From the front of your lens, you're about 2.5 to 3 inches when you're using a 50 to 65 millimeter lens, about 6 inches, and this is at life size, full frame, and 9.5 inches with a 180. So if you're talking about, let's say a little frog that would be perhaps skittish, well, I'd rather be using that 200 millimeter lens and be 9.5 inches away for a full frame shot, rather than be in its face at 3 inches where the frog might in fact hop away. I'll talk a little bit about this later on when we're talking about some of the equipment, but sometimes I'll use a focusing rail here around the house where I can carry this stuff. And that allows me to slide the camera into position without worry about my body being there or my tripod knocking leaves or vegetation or a spider web. And moving it like that, I can get in and look at the back of the monitor to see what's going on and have less of a risk of disturbing the subject. Now, there's other macro options. You have the close focusing telephoto lenses, which I just referred to a moment ago, or combining those with teleconverters, if indeed they'll take it, or just lenses like 70 to 200 millimeters or equivalent with either teleconverters added or extension tubes, or if you really want to, you can combine the two of those. This is an old Nikon lens chart. And on the far right-hand side, you can see the reproduction ratio, 1:2. So it's 1/2 life size. And my focusing distance there is, I think it's 1.3 feet. But at 2.8, my depth of field is only a 1/16 of an inch. And if I close down to f32, it's still only a 1/2 inch. Well, if you're photographing a thing like a green frog or a leopard frog or a butterfly facing you, even a ½ inch isn't going to cover the whole subject. Will you be sharing your slides? How do you mean by that?
Bill, Colleen and those people are recording this, so the recording will be available. And by going back through the recording, you'll be able to have the slides. And I think that was your question. So yes, you will have the slides to be able to review later.
So shorter lenses are going to provide greater depth of field at any given f-stop if they're at the same working distance. And we're talking about like how physically you are from your subject. But smaller lenses are going to give you a smaller image size. Smaller lenses meaning smaller focal length. If you're using a longer lens, you can have the same image size, but your working distance is going to be further back and your backgrounds are going to be different. But essentially, image size for your subject, the depth of field is going to be pretty much the same. So as we increase our image size via longer lenses, at any given working distance, your depth of field decreases, your angle of view decreases, as we just said. And as I alluded to earlier when I talked about flash, camera or subject movement can become more noticeable. And that's where, if you're not very steady, a flash would really come in handy, or making sure you're on a tripod. Now, here's a concept that I find that when we're teaching photography, some people have some confusion about. And that is that when you're using crop factor cameras, you're not changing anything about the physics of the lens. If you're using a 300mm lens on this penguin, it's a 300mm in its native magnification, whether you're using a full frame camera or you're using a crop factor. And that's what I'm showing here, that if you're using a 1.6 crop factor, you're only going to see that small portion of that penguin there, which might be perfect. And it's where people then think, well, I'm getting a greater magnification. Yes, you are, but you could crop that too from a full frame and get the same effect. However, right now I have that penguin full frame using that 1.6 crop factor. If I wanted to get the same image as I have on the left, where you have more rocks and you have the reflection, with my 1.6 factor camera, I would have to back up farther in order to get that in. And for the lens image size has now decreased. And as the lens image size has decreased, the depth of field increases. So we don't necessarily need a crop factor camera to get great magnification. We can do that same thing with simply cropping in on a full frame camera. It's a little bit more convenient at times that you see what you get and you don't have to do software after the fact. But we'll get the same image size regardless as far as the lens is concerned, not what the camera is concerned. Now, how does that, when I show this penguin picture, how does that apply to macro work? Well, I'm going to show you. Before I do that, here's my my 300mm. It's a crop factor camera, and this bullfrog shot, which is shot probably at f5.6, is sharp from end to end because I'm also using a feature that with the Olympus camera is in camera focus stacking, and it created all this great depth of field. But we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, let me click. There we go. So what's the advantages of using a telephoto for macro work? The big thing is working distance. You can be 4 feet or 5 feet away from a subject, perhaps, fill the frame with it or a nice composition, and not worry about disturbing something like that fishing spider, or here with the water strider, where when we were photographing this, I had a couple people on a private tutorial, and we saw those reflections there in the water, or I guess shadows in the water. And they kind of look like UFOs floating around. And they were caused because the water strider, with its legs stretched out as it was, wasn't breaking the surface tension of the water, so it was able to stay afloat, but it still cast that shadow as we're seeing here. So here's where I'm leading to in this. I have a little toy tiger instead of my turtle, And I'm shooting this with two different cameras at 22 inches. And at 22 inches away with the crop factor, I obviously get a bigger tiger. But if you look at those two red circles, the depth of field is the same, because at that working distance, the lens is determining that depth of field here. It's not whatever the depth of field is for that aperture, for that lens at that distance. It doesn't matter if it's a full frame or a crop factor camera. So remember, as image size increases, depth of field decreases. As image size decreases, depth of field increases. So in macro work, if your camera's sensor can handle it, you may be better off backing off and then cropping so you extend your depth of field. So here we have the full frame camera at 22 inches, and now I've backed off to 35 inches with the 1.6 crop factor camera. And you can see there that although my angle is just slightly a little bit different, you can see there's discernibly more detail in that background because the depth of field has extended. And if we really take this to extremes, let's use a full frame camera, and at 22 inches, I have the depth of field there at f32. That's pretty narrow. You can see that red circle. The screen is completely out of focus. But if I back up to 60 inches with the f32 and then crop it to the same size, you can see the real significant difference in the depth of field. So if your camera is and we're not talking about 50 megapixels. You can do this with like my Olympus with a 20 megapixel camera quite easily. This one has noise in it, and I didn't denoise it, but and that would certainly make a difference in that image. But my point here is that instead of moving in so close to try to get that macro shot of this black horsefly, I could crop to get the detail without the disturbance of moving in close. And I have better depth of field than I would have had I moved in closer. And here's a diagram of that whole thing. If my camera is close at any given aperture, my depth of field is going to be narrow. If I'm farther away from the subject, my depth of field extends because my image size will be smaller with the same focal length. Okay. So here's another example of that, and I didn't denoise this bugger either for the illustration, but I shot this with I think a 40 to 150 millimeter, and then at whatever aperture I'm using, I then cropped in for the full frame shot. And with denoise, you'd never know the difference there on that background. I was using a higher ISO, but I shot the same shot closer with a bigger lens to more approximate what we're seeing right here. And the depth of field did not cover as much as we see in this shot because image size was greater, depth of field was shallower. Now, if you don't have a macro lens, but you have a telephoto lens or an extension tube or a zoom lens, and you have extension tubes, you can also achieve magnification. And if you want to know precisely what that reproduction ratio is, rather than kind of just have a feel for, I look through the camera and say, well, this looks good. The formula for that is the length of the extension tube over the length of the lens. So as an example here, if I wanted to have half-life size with a 24 millimeter lens, I'd need 12 millimeters of extension. For a 50 millimeter, I would need 25 millimeters of extension and 100 millimeters for the 200. And if I wanted to be at life size, I'd need an equal size for both. Now, when we're talking about macro lenses, true macro lenses, this doesn't apply because that magnification or that tube building is done in the optics of the lens. But if we're adding an extension tube to a non-macro lens, that's what we're dealing with here. And believe me, I've done it. And when you're trying to use macro with an extension tube with a 24 millimeter or something like that, you're like this far from your subject. It is completely impractical. So it's far more practical to use an extension tube with a longer lens so that one, you're not right in its face, and also obviously then you have more working distance. And if you don't have all the magnification you want, you could certainly crop after the fact. So tubes often come in as a set in several different sizes, and commonly it might be like 12 and 20 or 25, then maybe 35 or 36 or even 50. And these extension tubes will work not just for macro, but will also work with any lens that they will fit behind. Because if some lenses they won't, because the macro or the extension tube often has a snook sticking in, and if the lens has a
Piece of glass.
piece of glass there, but if it doesn't, you can fit that in. Now, why I say that is I often use, or I used to use, I don't have to anymore, I used to use extension tubes when I was doing telephoto work, if I was photographing like chickadees or nuthatches or something that I wanted a closer view, and my lens at the time only focused to about 18 feet. Now, I could get within, say 12 feet, which is what I might need, with either a 12mm tube or a 50mm tube. But the difference is, and why I recommend using the smallest one that you need at the time, is suppose I have the bigger, thicker one on, and it only will focus now. It extends its range from 3 feet, but it's limited at 25 feet on the other end. Suppose I'm photographing the chickadees, and a sharp-shinned hawk comes down and nails that chickadee and then flies off onto a branch that is 40 feet away. Well, with that tube on, I can't get it in focus if I'm using the 50mm tube. I didn't need that to be within 12 feet. Had I used the 25 or the 12mm tube, I could have gotten that. Why do I mention that? Because this has happened to me back in the day, before I was a smarter photographer than I am today. So if you use zoom lenses with extension tubes, practice. You really have to practice. And the reason for that is when you're zoomed to the smallest focal length, your working distance is going to be close. If you zoom to the furthest distance, like 200mm, you can't be at that same distance. It won't focus. You have to move farther back. And I stress this because I've had people on workshops who had an extension tube on, and they're, well, I can't get it in focus now. It worked before. Well, it worked before because they were maybe at 200mm and 3 feet away. But now they're at 70mm and it wouldn't focus because you had to be closer. So practice that if you do use extension tubes on a zoom lens. Otherwise, you'll frustrate yourself. And you want to learn that at home, in your yard or whatever, and not when you're actively trying to photograph something. Then it's too late. So we can have the same image size with a longer macro lens as you will with a shorter, if you change your working distance. And by the way, a little natural history here. If you can see my cursor going on. This is a male green frog. Green frogs have a dorsolateral ridge here. If the ear on bullfrogs and green frogs is larger than the eye, it's a male. If it's the same size as the eye, then it's a female. What that tells you is even in the amphibian world, males like to pay attention to females and females ignore the males.
And they still don't listen.
So if I have my choice between using a longer focal length lens and a shorter for something like this, this palm viper in Costa Rica, you can be sure I'm going to rather be using the longer lens. And let me say how this was shot. We were at a reptile zoo where we could take the things out of the cages and photograph them. And we had it against a background, and the sky that was coming in was really stormy. So what I did here is I positioned the snake differently. So we had it against the sky background. And then with ambient light, I underexposed the sky so it looks stormy like you see here. And then I adjusted our flashes so that the flashes gave the correct exposure for the ambient light setting. So it may have been f/22 to get that sky, with some depth to it. and the sky was underexposed, but the flashes filled in what otherwise would have been a silhouette. And it really created I think, a pretty dramatic image. Okay. So again, working distances increase with greater focal length, but backgrounds decrease, and that can work for compressing images as well. So what do we want to do in a macro shot? Do we want to include a sense of place, or do we want to isolate the subject? And that's really where it comes down to. So basically the 30 millimeter, which is the equivalent of a 60, I have some sense of context here. With the 420 millimeter, who knows where that little toy turtle actually lives. So for these coral fungus, I wanted to get context on this. I wanted to have the habitat that these fungus were on. So I'm using a shorter lens to do that. And still, it was quite close. And in this case also, I was using this focus stacking technique to have great depth of field. So here's the same frog shot with two different lenses from the same working distance. The one on top is a portrait of the animal, and you almost have to look carefully at the bottom image to find that frog in there. And this would be a great illustration of camouflage. So what do we want to do? Do we want to tell a story of camouflage, or do we want to reveal the detail on the frog itself? And I really love to use these shorter lenses now and incorporate habitat in it as well. Like this wood turtle comes out in the spring, it hibernates, but it doesn't actually hibernate, it just stays in the streams during the winter and breathes through its cloaca. And then when it gets warm, it comes out, and that's exactly where I found it. And it has my woodlands right behind it. So your lens choice can reveal mystery or reveal detail, or it can show you the whole plant. As an example with this, I don't remember what type of tropical plant this is, but I was using a 16 millimeter lens, and the nearest fronds were actually touching the front of the lens. From that same position, when I put on a 180 millimeter macro, this is what I got. And who knows what that is? It a pine cone from a tree in the west, or is it that weird tropical plant? So what you want to achieve should really be dictating what lens you are using for that. And I think the lesson on that is if you like macro photography, it may be prudent to have more than one lens in your repertoire, or at least be thinking about moving forward or backward to get what you'd like. And just a diagram, if you will, of the different angles of view that would be involved with that. Okay, and Mary said slow down a little. Okay, all right, so that's lenses, angle of view, magnification. And let's talk a little bit about flash, because as I said earlier, flash can really be our friend. And on-camera flash photography can create harsh shadows, at least if the flashes themselves aren't diffused in some way. Although if you have like a twin flash system like this one here, you can have the flashes not directly on the camera lens, and in that way then have more directional lighting and more pleasing lighting than you otherwise might have. This was shot with the Canon 65E macro lens that focuses to 5:1, and it's similar to this Laowa that I was talking about earlier. And I've only used that thing about a half dozen times. I probably never should have bought it. It is so hard to find something in the field of view because you're looking at it basically like a microscope. It's a very, very narrow angle. Now, when I saw this monstrous garden spider in Florida, I wanted to get it with the ambient light behind. I like that effect that we had back there. But obviously you can see that my shutter speed, it's blurred and you can't see anything on the critter. So it definitely demands flash. And when I used flash, I got what is called ghosting. And the reason for that is the ambient light recorded one image and the flash recorded another, which froze it. But I have this weird shadowy kind of thing. That can really be a distraction, as you can imagine. And one way around that would be simply to underexpose the ambient light. So the entire exposure is a flash exposure. And if you're not very proficient on flash, probably most of your flash photographs look similar to this because the backgrounds will be dark because the default shutter speed generally is around 2/50th of a second when you put a flash on your hot shoe. However, if I used a slower shutter speed and I took enough shots that at least one of them, that darn spider wasn't shaking the web or wind wasn't doing so, I can have an ambient light background and a flash exposure. And that's really where digital is going to shine, because you can shoot as many shots as you need until you get it. Back in film days, this would be an expensive experiment. Now, dragonflies are classic examples of that. They don't fly around at night. And if I shot it at the default of 1/250th of f/16, I'd have a black background. And that's not how those, or when those insects are active. If I dropped my shutter speed down to 1/16th of a second, I now had the ambient light in the background visible as well. And now it's a far more accurate looking image. When you first shoot something like this, you very well might make the mistake. You know, you take your flash photograph and you end up with a black background. Realizing that, then you could change your shutter speed or raise your ISO if you needed to do so, so that you had the ambient light visible, and yet the flash exposure will still illuminate the insect. Now, how I did that bumblebee is with a device that I really like. It's called the AK Diffuser. And there's a guy in Florida that sells these things. It's under $100. It straps onto your hot shoe flash, and it gives wonderful lighting. I'll illustrate this again in a little bit. But as I said, one flash can create a real flashed look. And I've already alluded to how you can get around that. Well, here's an example with using two flashes for the one on the right, where one flash illuminated the spider from the front, and I had another flash held behind it to create that rim lighting effect, which is I think, far more attractive.
What was the left side?
The left side was just a straight flash. And then for this, same basic thing with this grass spider carrying an egg case on its back, by the way. When that egg case hatches, the baby spiderlings will go into the abdomen, the big fat part of the spider, for a couple days before they hop off. And for here, I had used two flashes, and I held the one flash over the back of the spider so that I could get that rim light effect. And here's if you buy a twin flash system, you'd have the capability of either mounting it onto the lens, as I have for that Olympus up there, or, and you could do the same with the Canon below, or you could use things like these Wimberley brackets, which I'll describe in a little bit as well, so that you can have different modeling and have a little bit more independence as to how you position the flash. So with the that weird sticky thing is actually some type of moth that created almost like a caddisfly kind of covering, and eventually that'll pupate out and become a little moth. And the one on the right, that cuckoo wasp, is actually was shot with the AK Diffuser system, which I very much like. Well, here's the basic brackets that would be used for an off-camera flash system. And this is the macro kit that Wimberley does with module 1 and a module 4. And for it to mount onto your lens, if you're using a basic quick release plate, you need that perpendicular plate as well, which is the bottom one. And this is all described on the Wimberley website.
If you see the internet connection is slow, just repeat what you said.
Okay. All right. Larry, were you okay with the
Colleen.
and Colleen for, I think everything's okay? Okay. So with these kind of brackets, I'd really recommend also investing in either like a strobo frame mini bracket or with Wimberley, these AP7 brackets, because then you can slip your hot shoe onto that bracket and you don't have to screw them in, which otherwise you would have to, and you'd risk stripping the screw thread of the flash, and you're also wasting a lot of time in doing that as well. Now, sometimes if I need to be very flexible and I'm doing stuff at night, I might have my flashes mounted to the lens, like you see here, and then I'll have my module 1 or module 4, whichever one that is, that arm up there, with the Wimberley, with a lume cube on top that illuminates my subject. And with that, then I can see things very, very easily. I don't know if you've ever tried this, but if you have like a console on there and you're using a headlamp or something, sometimes the flash blocks your headlamp and you can't see very well. This combination is the best combination I've worked out for this kind of macro work. And as I mentioned earlier, there's focusing rails you can get, and Really Right Stuff used to make one that was about 30 inches long. I don't think they do that anymore, but they may have one that's about 18 inches, and that would also be very convenient for sliding a camera back and forth. And you could use a cable release so that you don't have to be behind the camera, and you could use your LCD monitor to be looking at the framing and composition and focus. And then again, with those kind of things, and especially with an off-camera flash, we have the capability of different types of lighting and getting something other than like a straight flash shot. There's all sorts of ways that you can soften your lighting. And what I did here for this, it's a European hornet. These things are monsters, about 1.5 inches long. And it was eating grapes that we had put out on our bird feeding set. On the left, I used the AK diffuser. And on the right, I used just my standard hot shoe flash with that reflector coming down. And there was enough light that it did illuminate at that working distance, that hornet. But you can see that there's a whole different quality of the lighting. It's a more specular highlight type thing. On the right, the other one's very, very soft light. So whatever you want or what convenience you want. We just came back from a scouting trip to Costa Rica, and one of the guys that was photographing at the same time as us was using that kind of flash arrangement that I just showed with that other image. And I don't think that flash was doing anything there because it was simply too far away. And I don't know if he ever chimped his pictures to see if in fact they were illuminated or not, but I was very skeptical about what he was getting. What I was using here was a LumaQuest flash diffuser because I didn't want to carry that AK diffuser on this trip. And then I had an off-camera cable, and I'm not shooting at this exact moment because you notice there's a cord in front of my lens, which I didn't correct before I actually took the shot. And then Rogue, the company Rogue makes various flash benders and soft boxes that can be really handy for flash diffusion as well. And if you're concerned about a background that is going to be black for whatever, if you can't use a slower shutter speed in order to bring up a background, which would be a case in very dull light in a forest or at night, then think about having a background that you can put behind a subject, maybe just a small gray card or something, and direct your second flash there. Besides the actual manipulation of the flash by way of a diffuser or reflector, you may also have to tone down the flash because a flash, if you guys, can people see me right now?
So.
Oh, if you can see me, I have a black background behind me, and a TTL flash could possibly not only expose for me, but it could also try to put light on that background as well, which would end up then as an overexposure on the important subject, me. If you use flash compensation, and if it is on your camera, which I'm showing there with that little round dot, it's very handy because you can actually bracket in real time. If it's on an LCD monitor, it's a little less convenient, although once it's activated, you can do it inside the viewfinder as well. And if the flash or the camera doesn't have it on the camera, your better flashes have that flash compensation on the flash head itself. And here you see I've gone from 0 comp to -1.3. So I've toned down the brightness of the flash, if you will, to give me an exposure that was more in line and not looking overexposed. Now, you saw this chart earlier when I talked about depth of field. And the issue with macro subjects is your depth of field. The closer you are, the shallower the depth of field if we're going for image size. We talked about that with cropping. However, you may want to get maximum depth of field here.
Okay, you see it's unstable.
Okay.
Okay, now go.
Okay.
It shows up on your thing.
All right. So how can we get maximum depth of field, maximum sharpness, when inherently your depth of field is very, very shallow when you're talking about macro subjects? Well, one way, like I said, would be to crop. But if we close down the aperture to like f16 or 22 or 32, you're going to get greater depth of field, but you're also going to get diffraction with your lens, and the image won't be as sharp as it would be at, say, f11 or f13 or f8. So one's sharp without sharpness, and one is great depth of field, but it's not sharp because you're using that smaller aperture. So one way you can get around that to get the whole subject sharp is to use software. And one of those would be the helicone focus filter, where I shot in real time off a tripod 4 shots or 5 shots in a row, boom, 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 boom. And then with this helicone focus, it put it together into one composite shot that is completely in focus. Now, helicone focus has it. Photoshop, you can use photo merge with that fashion too, that'll mask an image. And there's another one, Zareen Stacker, which I'll show in a second. But in fact, if you refocus on each shot, there is a slight difference in the actual image size, as opposed to if you're using something like this macro rail package by Cognisys, where the focus is fixed and the camera actually moves to change the plane of focus. It's a little bit more complicated. I've used these in the studio, but I find it very cumbersome to try to use in the field. And for the difference, for what my discerning tastes, it hasn't been too important for being out in the field. But we have these choices: helicone focus, Zareen Stacker, Photoshop's photo merge, or you can also have, if you're an Olympus shooter, in-camera focus stacking, that after the shot is made, the camera composites it into a large file JPEG. And by the way, I have an ebook that's on that whole subject that I'll talk about a little bit later. So that is the other way, in-camera focus stacking. And how this works is you can set what's called a focus differential, which means how much of a space there would be between each shot that's taken. And for this particular example, I shot 15 shots and then put it together. But the focus differential, which ranges from 1 to 15, was at, or 1 to 10, was at 10. So there was a big gap between the shots, and that then resulted in gaps in the focus. So that wasn't the way to go there. I should have had a focus differential that was only 1 or 2, and that would have covered that. Or I could have just shot maybe 3 shots, used that focus differential of 10, but used the smaller aperture that would have overlapped each of the 3 shots and would have achieved that same result. Although the sharpness is going to detract a little bit, because at 22, you're not going to have the same critical sharpness as you would at like f8 or 5, 6, or 11. But with that kind of focus stacking capability here, I'm able to get from near to far with an extreme macro shot that has a lot of depth of field to it. And another example here, I have two pink lady slippers. They're right behind each other. So there's one close, one far away. If I shot it close to wide open, only one is sharp. If I shot where I've closed down the aperture, both might be sharp, might be, but the background now has a discernible background that you might want, but it might also be a distraction. You know, that's a compositional choice on your part. However, I can get all that sharpness on the one on the right by using focus stacking and a wide open aperture. Because now with like 15 shots, it's going across that flower, compositing it into a final image. But the depth of field for any one image was the depth of field of f4, not of f16. So the background is always blown out, and it will give me a very isolated look.
Explain that last image is a JPEG in camera. You didn't say that.
Okay, and the last image there is a in-camera JPEG that's the composite of the other 15 images. And
you still have in raw.
pardon me?
Of which you still have in raw.
Well, you still have it in RAW, but the camera does not compose or composite the raw image. But in truth, when I'm done with that, I delete all the images that made the final composite, because the final composite is the final composite, and I'm perfectly happy with that.
You just need to describe it more for Olympus, that's all.
Okay. All right. Now here would be another example. These are, or this is a praying mantis egg case, and it's in the field behind our house. The shot on the left has great depth of field, but that depth of field does not extend that the weeds behind it are sharp, but they're in what we call it like a zone of apparent sharpness. And you might want that shot to give a sense of context to the image that, well, there's where you find these praying mantises. But the shot on the right was done with focus stacking at f4, that the egg case is perfectly sharp all the way through, but the background is completely blown out. Now, I prefer that shot myself, but if I was trying to illustrate habitat, maybe I would go with the other one. So again, it's a choice. You okay there, Mary? Mm-hmm. Okay. And here, again, using that focus stacking technique, but I was using a very wide open aperture, but shooting 15 shots. And I'm sorry, I was using wide open aperture. No, closed down aperture, I'm sorry, because I wanted the background to be blurred as well. And I have sharpness throughout, but a nice defined background, not a defined background, but this angel hair effect, the cotton candy effect. And about 3 years ago, this is a 3-year-old picture now, but it was probably my favorite shot of the entire year, because these robber flies are about that long. They're about 1 inch long, and with that 300 millimeter and a 2x converter focused at about 5 feet, and using focus stacking, I have from the back of that insect to its proboscis sharp. And I could not have gotten that with any traditional system, because had I come in close, my depth of field would have been shallow, and I would have only had the eyes or the head. But by using focus stacking, I got that whole insect in there, and I was about 5 feet away. So I was just blown away by that shot. I hope you guys are too, because I really love that picture. Okay, flying insects. How in the world can you do that? Well, I mentioned these Cognisys things before, and they have a rig. It's kind of expensive, but if you're really into this flying insect stuff, you could do that. And how that works is with two lasers that cross, and there's an external shutter that when the laser is broken, the external shutter opens almost immediately, and the flash fires in synchrony with that. And with that, then you're able to catch stuff like this, a bumblebee flying towards the camera. And for this to really work, you need another flash on the background. Otherwise, you're going to have a bumblebee against a black background. So typically, I'll use a 3-flash system for that kind of thing. But you're using your flash at a low power ratio. I'm not using TTL for this kind of work. because I need to have a fast flash duration, which might be at 10,000th or more a second and still have great depth of field. And you might guess I have an entire ebook on that, which is understanding high-speed flash and triggering devices that would talk about that if you'd be interested. And that's available at ejunkie.com. Now, you guys in the West might encounter scorpions more often than we don't have them here in the East. And you can find scorpions with a UV light. They glow. Larry, when you're in Arizona, if you go around with you might freak yourself out with how many of these things you'll find in a campground at night. But they glow, and with a slow shutter speed and the UV light close, you can get kind of a interesting shot of these scorpions in that way. Now, here in the East, we have lightning bugs or fireflies, which are actually not bugs or flies. They are a bioluminescent beetle. And I showed one a moment ago. And at night, they blink to attract the mate. The female blinks back and they come down. Well, with a traditional exposure, to try to capture that.
Okay, you see you're unstable. Look at your screen.
Okay.
Okay, now let's go.
All right. Well, it was.
Okay.
I think everybody could see this at this
But
point.
it's you talking.
Okay. So I have, with a traditional exposure, if I want to do a long exposure, traditionally with most cameras, you're going to have additive light. So whatever light might be present, whether it's moonlight or starlight or a flashlight that's illuminating, over time, your light is going to be overexposed because the light is additive. Feature that's called live composite. And how that works is after an initial exposure is made, no other light registers on the sensor except light that is brighter than what is already recorded. So I take an exposure of the stream and the grasses right at dusk. It's a slow shutter speed exposure, and there's enough light that I'm illuminating the stream and the grasses. And after I shoot that picture, the camera will say ready for live composite, and I'll take the shot, and the camera actually stays on. It doesn't continue to shoot pictures. It just stays on, but this initial exposure never changes. And as fireflies start blinking, they get recorded. And it can really create some magical stuff. This is in our yard in about a 2-hour exposure. And you'd never guess when you're out there that there were that many fireflies blinking in that forest in the meadow around us. So it's a neat magical effect. You can use it for street scenes or camping scenes with like a glowing tent, and you want to get star trails as well. It's very, very.
Okay, can you stop a second?
Yes.
Can you answer the question of focus stacking? Read it out loud.
Okay, when using focus stacking, how much subject movement can you accommodate? Virtually none, because it's possible that as it's going through, if a part of the subject that is not in focus at that point moves, well, it's not going to register as when they're doing the computational photography. It may not even register that part. But if there's some movement back and forth or whatever, it's not going to work very well. So you really need to have a reasonably static subject. And
Plus, Chum, we tried to do. We also, and I'll come as the voice from outside. We tried to do it handheld, and it does not work handheld because you cannot stay steady. So you really need to be on a tripod or a monopod so that you are steady as well.
But I've done this with chipmunks, for example, where by accident, I was shooting macro the night before. I didn't change it off of the live or the focus stacking thing, and shot a chipmunk, which happened to just be still at the time. It may have been breathing, and its chest may have been going back and forth. But in the computational photography, the thing is sharp, end to end with the rocks behind. They're really kind of neat. So another feature that I love with this Olympus system that I'm using is something called Pro Capture. And what this does is when you press your shutter down halfway, it records images in the camera buffer, and it just keeps on recording and recording and overwriting after X number of frames, which you can set. It overwrites the first shot and replaces it with the last one in this continuous running buffer. Now, this is a wood frog, and wood frogs, when they're singing, you can imagine I'm the frog, they just pop out their throat like that and quack. And it is virtually impossible. It's really tough to catch them at that full expansion because they don't do it with any warning. However, with this Pro Capture, you're recording. When you see it happen, you fire. But the Pro Capture has captured up to, now with the newest camera, up to 70 pre-shutter shots. And you might be thinking, well, oh my God, that's going to eat up my buffer or eat up my card. Where you're only using it when you're trying to capture that kind of action. And if you're just holding the shutter down halfway and never fire a shot, you haven't used anything on your card. But this is what I've been able to do with this in natural light, where as a butterfly or a sphinx moth or a bee is either landing or taking off, and I see it happen, when I fire, my reaction time and the camera's delay time ensures that I'm going to have that insect out of the frame. But with that pre-shutter shooting, I'm catching that insect in as many as 70 different poses. Well, some are going to be not there because I'll have missed it because of that reaction time I'm talking about. And then about, I mentioned these lume cubes for focusing, and we're in the accessory aspect of what we're talking about now. And I love these lume cubes because unlike flash, where you kind of have to pre-visualize what the lighting is going to be, and then you really have to check with your monitor after you take a shot to see if indeed you got what you wanted. With the lume cube, you can adjust that back and forth, adjust the intensity to get the lighting that you want. So as an example, these saprophytic plants called Indian pipe, they're a flowering plant, but they don't have chlorophyll. The background was brighter than the foreground, but by using a lume cube panel and a lume cube, I was able to adjust the light the way I wanted to. So I'm using ambient light, but with the lume cubes to fill in the area. And it doesn't give up heat like other light sources would. So for this mushroom, I'm using the lume cubes, and also this is with a 300mm lens. I'm also using focus stacking, so I have great depth of field at a very slow shutter speed, and a reasonable shutter speed, but I'm shooting it reasonably wide open so that the background water stays blurred. And I did that with a lot of different kind of mushrooms like this. Here's another example with the lume cube. And two other accessories that I find very handy at times would be like ground level tripods, or even like a molar bag or a bean bag, and then diffusers or reflectors in order to soften the light, which is what I used here. I had a ground level tripod, I had a diffuser over the flower, and then I had a reflector off to the side a little bit, so whatever ambient light that might still be bouncing into there, I could fill in on this Hepatica flower. And then what you can find handy for this kind of work as well are these Wimberley clamps, and how they work is they can be used to either support a plant that might be shaking in a wind, and they have a kind of like a notch in them and a foam pad, so you're not going to crush the stem. And you can also use those things to support a diffuser or reflector, or any number of different things. So everything that I talked about today is in this ebook that I did. It's almost 200 pages, and this is available on eJunkie. And if you're interested in this book or any book that I have on that focus stacking or flash or whatever, I have I think it's a 20 or 25% discount for you guys if you use this code.
For how long?
It'll be, I think it's till the end of May, but I meant to have it only for the month of April. So basically figure that this will be available this entire month, but it'll knock off 20% or 25%. I forget which. I did this last night, and I don't remember what I did. Short-term memory. So to contact us about anything, there's our Facebook page. I have an Instagram page as well that you can link from our Hoot Hollow website, and our eJunkie. And I also have a YouTube channel where if you type in my name, it will give you our YouTube channel, and I have a lot of different things on that. And there's a question, is Loom Tube always mounted on top of the camera hot shoe? No, it has a 1/4 20 screw thread to it, and you can screw in the attached accessory, which is like a hot shoe piece that you can slide into a hot shoe flash mount. But you could also screw that onto a light stand, or Loom Cube makes these small tripods now that extend to about 4 feet, and they're only about maybe 12 inches. They're very lightweight. They're designed for the Loom Cube stuff, but you can mount a flash on it as well. And a lot of times when I'm using the Loom Cubes, I have my camera mounted and I'm holding the flashes in different, or the cubes in different positions. I might brace one on the ground and hold the other one up, but so you don't really need supports on necessarily. So that's questions.
That was an hour. That was an hour.
That was an hour?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, are you going to click?
Thank you.
Okay, so I am going to stop this and go to any questions you might have. Colleen, are we going to do that live? Or are they going to type them in?
They can type them in and you can monitor those on your end.
Oh, you're welcome, Bill. And by the way, Ray Fortner, it's so good to hear from you. And yes, we'll be in Tucson for the Nampa meeting in May of 2023. So I'm also going to, if you can all, let's see, I'm actually going to open up my chat thing, and I'm going to type in our eJunkie thing plus the code for you all, so that you don't have to refer back to this recorded thing, but Joe can keep answering things as I type this.
Yeah, what I wanted to show you too, like this is that Olympus system that I'm talking about here, where the two macro flashes are attached to the lens itself. But this basically works with almost any, something similar, works with almost any system, that I can take it off and hold it wherever I would like to hold it to adjust my lighting. So I could have both of these off or both of them on, and then with the Loom Cube, like I said, I can do that. Well, with the Loom Cube, I can do the lighting at night very easily. And I used to use Canon. This was the Canon 180mm macro with the 7D on it. And my goal here was not to try to present a Olympus sales, if you will, but about 4 years ago we had a loaner from Olympus, and we had all of the Canon gear that we would ever need to like sail off into our photographic sunset with the gear we had, that we wouldn't have to buy anything else. And when you look at this versus this for weight, we were in Chile. We have been carrying around our 300, which was the equivalent of a 600mm, can take converters. And I said to Mary that we could sail into our photo sunset and never spend another dollar, or we can enjoy ourselves. And we switched, and I have never, in any presentation up until we switched, I never talked about systems because it didn't matter. This matters because the demographics of most of the folks here, we're all getting up in age. Weight is an issue. When we were in Costa Rica, we had a guy that was just a year older than Mary. His pack weighed 70 pounds, and his Nikon gear with the lens on it weighed, 20, 25 pounds. We were carrying around the equivalent, the 150 to 400 with the converter, up to 1,000 millimeter, and we could hold it in one hand and walk anywhere. And when you think of flexibility, that you can go anywhere and have wonderful features as well, you have to get away from the ego of like, I have a big white lens or black lens, because optically it doesn't matter. These lenses are as sharp as can be, but you're getting stuff because you can carry it and you can be places. We were just in, I was shooting eagles in Maryland, and we got talking to some guy, and he had a 1-400, and he, I said, is that what you use? He goes, well, I have a 600 in the car, but it's like a quarter mile. I'm not going to carry that big thing all the way up here. He could have been.
So
You know,
did you
so-
guys think about why Olympus versus Nikon and Canon?
Yeah, the reason why Olympus versus Nikon and Canon, and I've shot both those systems, is both Nikon and Canon now are coming out with some really good mirrorless cameras and stuff, but the lenses are still reasonably big, or big one way or the other. And some of their lenses, my God, are like $12,000 or $16,000. They're Canon lens. They just came out with I think a 1,200 millimeter lens. We have, go get it. It's right there. We have the equivalent of 1,000 millimeter, the most expensive lens they have, and it's 7,500. And it's the equivalent of 1,000 millimeter, and you can put a 2x converter on it. The Canon 1,200 millimeter is $20,000, and a lot of their lenses are like 12 to 16. This is their, they're like, Mecca from heaven or manna from heaven. And this I'm holding right now. You hold it, Mary. And she's a weakling. Look at that. And that's right now, it's a 300 to 1,000 millimeter lens, and it's as sharp as anything I've ever shot. So that's why I just love this stuff. I really do. And everybody that we know, and obviously it sounds like I'm pretty enthusiastic about this. When we're on trips and people see what I get, like with pro capture or focus stacking, almost everybody switches afterwards. And the words that we hear from people is it's made photography fun again. And it really has, because I've done stuff now with that focus stacking and pro capture that it was like, man, I could never get that shot before. And now I'm getting stuff like I never got before.
Okay, Mike, we'll answer your question about the extreme macro, but since Joe's talking about it, talk about the noise level with the 4/3.
Yeah, they have a new camera out, the OM1. It's their new like pro version, and ISO 18 or ISO 1600 does basically a noiseless job. Some people are saying 6400 is still doing it well. I've depending on what the lighting circumstances are, I've shot 3200 and the noise has not been an issue. But as at least with the bias, all the Olympus shooters are saying, hey, with Topaz denoise or some of the other denoise features, in fact, even with Olympus's software denoise function, noise isn't that much of an issue. So I showed a couple of those shots that were shot that were noise to it, because I just didn't bother to denoise that background. But had I, you would never even seen the noise on that.
So as Joe said, we have the new OM1 camera, but we also use the Mark III or the OM1X or M1X. So, but we'll probably be switching more to the OM1 because of all the features. It kind of has combined the other two cameras' features. So I'm going to actually flip around here a little bit to answer some of the questions. So talk about the, Mike asked, can speak about extreme macro, say about 8X.
Well, there's a couple different ways you can do that. And I haven't done that for a while, but one way you can do it is to have a lens reversing ring that you would mount one lens backwards on front of another one. And the magnification on that, if memory serves me correctly, is whatever you're using, you divide that into the lens that's reversed and you get the multiplication factor, which is about 2x or so. This lens that I'm holding right here is the Olympus 30mm macro, and it focuses to 2.5 life size. When you get beyond 2.5 life size, like that Canon or that this Laowa lens that I showed before, when you get up to 5x or so, you are even 3x and greater, you are really in the range of doing stuff in studio, because you can't do that in the field. You just can't find the subject, and it's just murder. So if you needed to get greater, you might be talking about doing microscope work at that point, which I haven't bothered with. And or an easier solution might be cropping that image down. But once you get past like 3x, 2.5x, I've done it. It is tough. You're far better off at like 2-to-1 or even 1-to-1, but no more than that.
Answer it, Sukos.
Yeah.
About the plant.
The bendable snake-like extension tool for holding flowers or a panel is called the Wimberley Plant. And there might be other versions of that if you get on like Amazon or Google that are knockoffs on that. Wimberley were the first ones to make something like that. They're a great company. I would certainly recommend them rather than some ripoff that capitalized on the same thing. We should reward people for their innovativeness.
Okay. Ray asked about explaining the details of how we got the scorpion with the bioluminescence, and then can you do it with fungi?
Yeah, you might be able to do it with fungi if the fungi reacts to UV light, and I'm not sure if it does or not. There's a fungi in the east, it might be found out in the northwest as well, called the jack-o'-lantern fungi, and it glows bioluminescently at night. But I tried to get that this year, and the thing wouldn't glow for me. I was out pretty late, and nothing ever changed. But they do, and sometimes they say that a big cluster of them will be bright enough that you can read a newspaper from the light. Well, I would have been lost in the dark with the ones I was photographing. The scorpion was done with a UV light, and you can buy
Like
these.
you
can buy them at hardware stores and stuff. And I held it reasonably close because they're not very bright, but I held it reasonably close. And then I had my camera on a tripod so that I had, I was as still as I possibly could be. And the scorpion wasn't moving about either for that. And then basically it's an ambient light exposure. And if you guys are not shooting mirrorless yet, whether you're shooting Olympus or Canon or Nikon or whatever, or Sony, mirrorless is so convenient because what you see is what you get. You don't have to chimp, you don't have to take a picture and go, oh, I got to adjust. You can adjust it in camera to see what's going on. And so something like that scorpion, you can see when the exposure is right by just adjusting your shutter speed and aperture and snap away.
So there's a question about some people are using cameras that don't have replaceable lenses, like the Coolpix series or one of the other, like the Canon SX40HS. So with using a camera like that, does the theory still work that as image size increases, depth of field decreases?
Yes and no. Those lenses are so small that they have inherently great depth of field right off the get-go. So as you get closer on that, yeah, it theoretically it probably has some effect, but because those lenses are so small themselves, the inherent depth of field is such that it probably won't matter at all. It won't be like if you're using a full frame camera or any of the crop factor cameras with traditional lenses. And by the way, regarding that, it is absolutely amazing what these smartphones are doing now, much to the demise of a lot of camera real retail stores because people are using those instead. But they do an incredible job for that kind of snapshot type stuff. I don't use it because they're smartphones and I don't qualify, and it just goes against my grain as being a traditional photographer that feels like he's something of a craftsman.
By the way, just to share it in the chat thing, Affinity Photo was also mentioned, that does a great job of focus stacking, another software program. So in case anybody's interested. And if you do look back through the chat, I did put in our eJunkie site and the code for you guys, or for everybody there, everybody who's been here. So, but Meredith also asked, do you always use a supplemental light when you're photographing macro?
No, not if I don't need it. Sometimes, like if I'm shooting mushrooms or flowers or fungi, especially like if you're in a forest and you find mushrooms or something like that, the light might be very low, or it might be contrasty with sunlight coming in or something. So if that would be the case, you have two options. You have using flash as one option, or you have the lume cubes as your other option. And the nice thing about those lume cubes is, as I said, you can adjust by both the power of the lume cube, you can adjust the power, or by the distance as you move it closer or farther away, kind of taking advantage of that inverse square law, if you will. So the nice thing about the lume cubes in that regard then is you can see the lighting, and when it looks good, hey, shoot it at that point. Whereas with flash, you don't have that. And then someone had about the Air Mini LED. It might be a knockoff of the lume cube, because I've seen like on
Well,
Google
is
or
the
whatever.
Lume cube code an Air Mini LED?
No, it's not. It is.
No,
Yeah,
it is called.
it
the
is
Lume
called.
Cube.
If you would Google lume cube, it would come up, and there'll be a thing, official site of the lume cube. And Hunt's Photo, which we use quite a bit in Massachusetts, has these things, you know, and you can call them and say, hey, what do I need? There's two types. There's one, well,
Which one is it?
the other one is in the
Is this
box
the
right
lume
now.
cube?
No, that's a lume cube, but in the equipment
Okay,
room.
by the way, what we've been lighting ourselves with is, this is one of the lume cubes that I'm holding up right now. It's a longer panel.
Yeah, and watch, like, okay, I'm a mushroom. I'm a dead fungi. Okay, and as I move the light, I can get whatever effect I want, and I can see it. You know, and you can't do that with flash without pre-visualization and then taking the shot. But with these things, you know, you can see whatever effect you want to get. And I really like, Hunt's Photo sent me one to see if I want to like do a video on it. And I thought, this is a gimmick, but I tried it, and I really like them now, because for that macro work, you can see the effect you're going to get. And if you're doing, like I showed that one image where I had it on a Wimberley, and I can now have a light source that's aimed right at my subject. And if you do video, you can just jack up that light, and right with what would have been the focusing light of your, for still photography, I can just turn a switch and I'm on video now, and I have a light source right there on my subject. So it's a real handy device. Now, what it won't do, because it's not flash, it's not as bright as a flash, you're not going to be able to use it to freeze action, because it's not a fast flash duration. It's just ambient light.
So I could only find, this is the lume cube.
Okay.
But what this is also nice is when you turn it on, you can actually, what we've done with the lights that are lighting us right now, you can actually vary the intensity. So you can like turn it down or turn it up. So we have these down at, I think, at like 5% light. And this is how much light we have them. If I'm sitting right here, they're at least 3 and 4 feet away. So you can see how much light they give. Before we used the lume cubes for doing stuff like this, we did use reflectors, because with reflectors, just like the lume cubes, we could see the light that we were putting onto our macro subjects.
But you needed light to begin
But
with.
we need light to begin with. And sometimes in the dark forest, that didn't work.
Okay, so where did you get that one?
Out of the box.
Okay,
I will.
take it, because it's, so here is the official lume cube. Okay, and right now I have the hot shoe mount that comes with it that I could slip in, but I can unscrew that and put this right into a light stand. And I mentioned the lume cube. This is a light stand that they make, and you can see it's whatever the length of my forearm is. So when the legs are out, it'll be a little bit smaller, but this will extend up to 4 feet, and it has a 1/4 20 screw thread on it, so I could mount a flash if I had an off-camera flash bracket, or I could put the lume cubes on there as well.
And what was nice with these, when we just came back from Costa Rica in January, we take light stands to do hummingbird photography. We could take these in our luggage and our duffels versus the big light stands, which are much bigger and more weight. So this was much more convenient.
So when I was in Costa Rica, because we didn't know, we had to fly into this location and we weren't sure what our weight was going to be. So I brought this lume cube with me, or not lume cube, LumaQuest softbox, and it's supposed to attach with a Velcro and whatever. I lost it at some point. So I had gaffer's tape. You can see my gaffer's tape here. And I just strapped it around there. And if you remember the picture, it wasn't like completely squared out, but it was enough that it still softened the light. You don't have to get anal on this. All you have to do is soften the light, you know, and there's several different ways that you can go about doing that. And then as we continue our show and tell, you need the perpendicular plate here to mount the lens on. And then this is the very, it's infinitely twistable, and then you can just lock it in place and you have your flash positioned wherever you want to with this piece mounted onto the camera body or onto a lens if you have a lens with a foot to it. So those are basically those couple things that I showed you between the lume cube, the flash, the twin flash system, or that AK diffuser. That's in the closet if you can grab that.
Pam, by the way, I just typed you a thing. You said you're in Portugal, and it sounds like that it actually is the same thing from what you described. So I did type you an answer that it is probably the Air Mini LED, especially if it's on the lume cube thing. Joe will answer one. Do you explain in your ebook the difference between mirrorless and older cameras?
No, not really, because I didn't feel there was any need to be honest with you. Mirrorless cameras, what you see is what you get if you did the settings so that your settings reflect the actual exposure. You can do that, I think, with a mirrorless camera where it gives you kind of like wide open aperture all the time. It doesn't necessarily reflect what the exposure will be, but that's you know that's the only difference there that would need to be addressed, and I've just felt that was a given. What I'm talking about with this book is using stuff like this and how to use it and what it will do. This, by the way, is that AK diffuser, which you can, anyway.
Okay, so there is also about this. Do you have a feel for how the eye detection on OM1 works compared to Canon, Nikon, or Sony eye detection on wildlife, especially birds?
Well, I just used that OM1 for the first time with flight. We came back from Florida about 3 weeks ago, between that and this Costa Rica trip. And I was at the Florida alligator farm where there were a lot of birds flying, and there were times when it missed, but it would be like, oh, there's an egret, and I put it up and I'd have the camera on it and fire, and the camera simply didn't have time to acquire focus. But if I had like a second or two to get it on, you know, and not just like, you know, like shotgun it, it was amazing how sharp and accurate that thing was.
Were you on bird tracking?
I was on bird tracking, and the thing with that camera is it has bird tracking, and now it also has dog and cat tracking, which I used on the monkeys in Costa Rica because the camera didn't know it was a squirrel monkey and not a cat, you know, so it worked on that as well. We just had a guy who had bought Olympus stuff and just traded in on the Canon R5 because he shot them both and he got better results with the R5, he said. But we really think there was operator error going on that, and not, you know, not that system. With the older Olympus stuff here, I've used the 40-150. Now that's an 80-300 on skimmers. If you know what skimmers are, they're birds with a longer bill. They fly crazily, and I was shooting those things and with the older system yet, and just nailing focus on it. So it's if there is a difference, and maybe there is a slight difference, but for the difference that difference makes compared to the flexibility and the weight, I'll take maybe getting 6 out of 8 shots or 6 out of 10 and not getting 8 out of 10 to be able to carry that darn lens wherever the heck I want to use it. So, and the weight of those other systems are, for most of us, I think we're all kind of in the same age, demographic there. Any of those other systems could like say, oh, Joe and Marianne, you guys, we want to sponsor you and I would not switch. You couldn't get me to switch because I am movable, I'm flexible, and I'm not a sloth. I'm a pretty active guy, and I'm more active than that than I ever could be before. So,
Okay. So have you used the Olympus high res mode for macro work? Can it be combined with focus stacking?
I don't think it can be combined with focus stacking. I'll say no on that and yes on the other, but very rarely.
No on what and yes and what?
Well, no on can it be combined with focus stacking? I don't think it can. I have used the high res on very limited occasions. I simply haven't seen the need for it, to be honest with you. When I've done focus stacking, the high resolution shot it gives is like the maximum superfine JPEG. And we still sell photographs to magazines and whatever. And all magazines want when you send it to them are JPEGs. And the quality of that JPEG is perfectly adequate. So the high resolution is taking, I guess, 2 shots and kind of matching them together. I've done it for my books to show it, but I haven't used it much because I simply haven't had the need for it. And the nice thing with that focus stacking is if you're shooting at a faster shutter speed, it happens so quick that a subject that could potentially be moving but isn't moved, like is just like might be moving slightly, it happens so quickly with those bam 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 of the shots that it very well may work. But I wouldn't try it with like a hawk flying in or something like that. It'd be ridiculous. But if you had a turtle that might be walking along, it might do it at that point.
Okay, so Craig said about a poppet type snake, a flexible thing would work just like with the Lume Cube, like probably like the Plamp does. I'm sure there's other things out there that are very similar that we just aren't aware of, but anything that's flexible like that, the thing we like about the Plamp is the Plamp part of it doesn't squish the plant. It does have that little notch with the foam, and we don't like to destroy things. We don't clip things. We don't destroy our nature when we're doing it. So the Plamp really works well. And one final thing, and then we'll turn it over to Colleen, you guys, because we need to do all the slide stuff, is Ray and also Larry mentioned about Nampa, North American Nature Photography Association. It is a great organization to belong to. They have regional events, and the in-person live summit, yay, will be next 1st of May in Tucson. I highly recommend it. There will be all sorts of speakers and exhibition stuff and side workshops. And it's a great network to belong to, as well as your camera club, because it's a great sharing organization and everybody likes to share. So I would recommend you looking it up.
Yeah, we'll be there, I'm sure. And you can have some drinks with Mary in the bar. I'll probably be in my room reading books, but
we won't go into that right now, but we actually may, because I'm actually on the Nampa Foundation board as well. Joe doesn't know, but I think I'm volunteering him that we'll probably be leading one of the workshop or side things. So come join us.
Gerald has been very instrumental in kind of keeping these Zoom meetings on track and organized, sort of our chairman type of person, but he has an announcement to make today.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm actually in North Carolina, so it's afternoon for me. You will recall that at our November meeting, we elected Harold Klein as our president to succeed Larry Rosenketter after all his years of service. And the following week, Harold contacted us and told us that his business circumstances had changed and he did not feel like he could satisfy that commitment and honor his commitment as president of the Northwest Nature Photographers. So he resigned, and our bylaws suggest that presidency would pass to the vice president, but Mary Pinion is dealing with some family circumstances that preclude her ability for right now to assume the presidency. And after that, the bylaws were silent as to what should be done. And Larry Rosenketter graciously stepped forward and said that he would get us through another year. And hence, he opened this morning's meeting as both our founder and our current president. I really have no further information on that at this point, but we will actively recruit potential candidates for officers of the organization in advance of the November meeting. So Colleen, thank you.
In addition to recruiting for a new president in November, I'd like you all also to be thinking about how we might make this organization continue, maybe in a slightly different way, maybe not putting all the burden on one person's shoulders. So just be thinking about that and let us know if you have any ideas. You can also send a message to us via the website if you think of some way that might be helpful to us. So let's move on into our image competitions. It's very traditional to our organization. We have 3 categories of photos that we're going to be showing, all nature related. And so I'd like to introduce our Vice President, Mary Pinion.
Hi, thanks, Colleen. I'm Mary Pinion. I'm pleased to present the results of our photo competitions. Before each meeting, we asked members to submit their images for the following categories: plant life, scenic, and wildlife. So members could submit up to 3 images for this year's competition, or this meeting's competition. So first, I'd like to recognize and thank our members who volunteered to be our judges this time. We always ask for volunteers to help out as and serve as our judges. So for the plant life category, it was judged by Alan Brooks, Christy Holmgren, John Peterson, and Dave Eckert as our alternate. For the scenic category, it was judged by Ted Craigo, Patrick Alto, and David Bostock, and Kathy Zhu was our alternate judge. For the wildlife category, it was judged by Sandra Zelasco, Jack Graham, John Schwartz, and Sue Zhu was our alternate. And I want to thank all of you for providing your time and expertise in judging this meeting submissions. And my apologies if I mispronounced your name. So judging was completed online, just as we've done for the past couple of years. Each judge was given access to the images in the competition that they volunteered to judge, and scoring was done blind with no maker marks, and judges recorded their scores on a spreadsheet, which was collated by Bruce Miller. And I wanted to send a special thank you to Bruce for coordinating the judging and preparing the images for viewing, because I know that's a lot of work. So thanks to Bruce. Our images were scored using the following guidelines. Scoring was in the 65 to 99 point range, with a score of 66 to 69 indicating a solid image. Scores of 70 to 79 indicated a very strong image with good technical and image contents. Scores of 80 to 89 indicated an excellent image with unique content, strong design, and technical excellence. And scores of 90 and above indicated a superior image with no faults and an outstanding impact. As this is nature photography, the limited hand of man rule was followed. So, having said all that, let's look at the competition images by category. So we'll see all the submissions by category, followed then with the score for each of the images. that are being shown. So after that, we'll see the top images and ask the maker to talk a little bit about the image and then ask Joe to comment on it as well. So first, we'll start out with plant life category. We had 38 images that were judged. So Bruce, if you could put those up, we'll take a look. All right, that's those are our plant life images, and thank you to everyone who submitted. Let's go over some of the top scoring images for plant life. So Bruce, if you could put those up. All right, in fourth place is Succulent Heart by Kim Cook Tran. Kim, did you want to say a little bit about your image?
Hi. Yeah, this shot I did on the way, actually go to the wedding in California. And when we walked by the storefront, in front of that store with the white background, it should be. And so I tried to shoot with my camera at the time, but it didn't really work because I want to have all the good depth of field. So I used my phone to shoot this one, and it turned out pretty good depth of field, and in the background nice and clean, so I don't really have to do anything much.
All right, thank you. Joe, what are your thoughts on this image?
I'm getting a phone.
Well, we were attracted to this shot too. And I didn't recognize the heart aspect of it, but that's kind of clever on that part. I thought that it was a composite because of the absolute perfect symmetry on the two limbs. On their I was just stunned if that's a straight, not a photo composite. I'm just stunned at the symmetry there. It's a perfect mirror image, but be that as it may, we certainly thought that was a high scoring image, and love the lighting, and we have to chuckle now knowing that it was with a cell phone too, because they do such a great job. So I thought that was well done.
Anyway, you were right about the composite part of that. Actually, I did have a shot out of this same flower that have a heart shape like that, and it gave me an idea to accept the one with the heart shape. I didn't get a good background, so I used that idea, and actually this flower, this plant can have exactly shape and uniform like that. And that's what gave me an idea.
Yeah, good for you. I think I applaud your creativity there and recognizing the potential that offered. So.
And I like the other little blossom down in the lower right. I thought that added to it. I thought it was good.
Yeah, and also, like if you weren't really that observant, it would certainly add to the veracity, the truth of the image just as it is. But very nice. We thought that was a well executed shot. Liked it.
Okay, thank you. Very good. For third place, we have Lily Blossom by Bruce Benson. Bruce, do you have some words to talk about your image?
Mary, I do not see that Bruce Benson is online with us. Bruce, if you are online under a different name, there's the problem. So at this point, I don't have anything from Bruce, so maybe we just move to Joe.
All right, Joe and Marianne, what are your thoughts about this image?
Well, again, when we saw this, it caught our eye. It was before even the scores came up. We saw that, and it certainly caught our eye. And I think what's really kind of cool on that is it is half in the water and half out, and whether it was with polarization or what, but you have the second half of that flower visible underneath as well to create a complete sphere, if you will. And it almost has a alien look to it, or like a strange beetle that's so it's not just a plant. It almost looks like something that's not a plant. And the lighting is wonderful. I really like the fact that you can see underneath it as well, that it's cut into the water like that. And with the atmosphere there, with the drips, the water droplets on top, like I said, when we saw it, this was like, that's a good one. And color saturation, framing is real good. I like, there could be people might be thinking, well, what if it was just floating there without the plant? I think the plants on the lower right corner really give it context. And I think too often people are so trying to get things just pure. And this is part of an environment here. We're natural history photographers, so include a little bit of that. And you certainly did that there. So all the way around, good choice. I like
Okay,
the fly on it too.
Thanks for that. In second place, we have Cactus Flower by David Martin. David, are you here? Can you tell us a little about your image?
Yes, I live in Maricopa, Arizona now. I moved from the Pacific Northwest out here to be closer to family, but in my neighborhood, there's a lot of these types of flowers and stuff. This was shot very early in the morning, and usually they're white petals. This one I had never seen before, this exact color. And I just fell in love with it.
All right, thank you. Marianne and Joe, what do you think of this image?
Again, when we saw this, it caught our eye.
Yeah, I like, a lot of times, sometimes when people shoot flowers straight down, it's almost floating in space, but I like that you can see the pebble, the background, because that gives it some context. And with the looks like a little hedgehog cactus or a little barrel cactus up in the upper left, it also adds some meat to that picture. And I'll tell you, the detail in the center of that cactus flower is just amazing. And it would be something to think about even cropping in to do just that one center part, because it's just beautiful. But great color, great saturation. And I like that he has the whole flower and didn't cut off any of the tips.
Yeah, I wonder if it was flipped the other way, that the big cluster of stamens was up and towards the top rather than hanging at the bottom, just to see what it would look like in that regard. And that's not a criticism. That's just like, I wonder, visually how it would look in that regard. But what was the lighting there? Because it's wonderfully diffused lighting. Was it like before the sun popped up on it, or?
Actually, it was like I'd say about 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah. I mean, and great choice of your depth of field that's going throughout the whole plant, and giving some context with the ground below it, that I think in this particular case actually adds in a neat framing device to it. So I mean, like two different contrasts there. This nice soft flower with a lot of detail, and then the hard desert rock below. Again, your pick so far for these top shots were shots that when we saw them, it's like that's a good one. That's a good one. That's a good one. So
wonderful, thank you. So our first place is Lotus Bud by Jan Eckloff. Jan, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. This was taken last year at Hughes Water Garden in Fulton, Oregon. I did do some work on the background, and I like to use filters. So this gave it more of a soft effect and evened out the green tones. And that's about it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Joe and Marianne, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that was a real wise use of the filters for that, because it has a real soft, ethereal look to it, and the colors aren't overpowering there. And it's just a very soft. I look at this and go like, boy, there's like a sympathy card.
It's a soothing. It just the colors and the blend of everything is very soothing. So this is one of those pictures which can emote emotions, just not it's only just looking at the picture. And I thought it's very well done. Sometimes the simpler the picture, the better for conveying things. And I thought this did a really good job.
Yeah, the softness throughout that. I mean, the way that's been done, that could almost have been shot in real time on a really foggy day and create that same effect. So a wise choice of filters. And I think what this also illustrates very neatly is how this shot is like the polar opposite of the other shot, the one with like the hedgehog cactus type of thing. equally good images, but completely different vision on how just a subject like a flower can be interpreted in different ways. And we have some in these 4 winners, if you will. We have kind of where we've used the tools that we now have available as digital photographers, in the sense of some image manipulation afterwards with filters or doubling, and then more straight shooting with the other shots that were equally good and done in almost a more traditional way. So
And it just shows how photography is an art form.
Yeah.
It shows your creativity, and you can really get to know the person by seeing how they shot a picture.
Yeah, and in regard to that, one of the things that I think for those that may not have scored as high or didn't win, we've had people on our workshops at times who have come to us with their tail between their legs because they never won in a photo contest. Like they've been in camera clubs forever, and I'd see their work and it's like, oh my heavens, this is great, and I told them that maybe every time they came in 4th place, that they were like the most talented overall photographer, but they never won. But because they never won, they were never recognized. And as Mary just said, photography is an art form. For us, we do this as a celebration of nature. Like, I don't care if anybody doesn't like my pictures. I just celebrate life. This is what we're shooting. And I think everyone that we're shooting here today has their personal vision, and maybe, in some cases, technique can be jacked up a little bit or whatever, but it's your art, and be proud of that. So
Great job for everybody.
yeah, and it's so neat to see 4 winners there that are like spanning the whole genre. So pretty cool.
Thank you for your
Looking forward to
comments.
the other ones.
All right. Well said, Joe and Marianne. So thanks again to all of our entrants and artists in the plant life category. So let's move on next to the scenic category. If you're ready, Bruce. We had 44 images in the scenic category that were judged, and you'll see the image first without the score and then with the score.
Wow.
Was there a score in the other one?
80 something, 85.
All right, thank you. And thank you to all the entrants in our scenic category. So we'll look next at the top 4 scoring images for scenic and ask Joe and Marianne to comment on them, as well as the makers to comment. Our 4th place is Sunlight Dune by Adrian Brockman with a score of 82. Adrian, are you here? Would you like
Yes,
to
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, tell us a little bit about your image.
That was taken in Namibia a couple of years ago. And it's, you know, it's out in the dunes area of Namibia. I can't tell you much more. We were lucky to get there, obviously, at the right time when the light was very good.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Joe and Marianne, what would you like to share about your thoughts on this one?
Well, the first thing on that is for you guys that are shooting landscape, when we're teaching photography, we tell people landscape is probably the hardest thing to shoot. When you have animals, you fill the frame, bam, you got a good shot. With landscape, you have to look for vignettes that tell the story, you know, something that catches your eye. And so you have the whole world in front of you and you're taking it down into your lens there to get, so it's a difficult skill. And
we were blown away by
yeah.
a lot of these pictures.
Yeah.
You know, and here in Sosavle, we've seen a lot of pictures from this area, but the colors and the shadows and the perfect light on the tree in front with the shadow behind and just the different colors involved with those dunes. I mean, this is an exquisite shot. I mean, with the lines and the sinuousness through the image, and I love it. I mean, I just think it's unique and it's beautiful.
Yeah. Now, was there very much like post-processing done with in the converter or anything on that?
No, no.
Okay. The reason I asked that, and that wasn't a knock on this image at all, but some of the images that I thought could have really been higher scored, I thought some more attention with post-processing could have really helped with contrast or detail or whatever. And maybe you guys want to do like a workshop on that at some point in the future with somebody, because some of the images I think would have been a lot stronger had that been the case. That's why I asked about this, because this one is so, man, it is graphic and it's a beautiful graphic, which you can get in Namibia at early light like that. When we saw this, and I think this was the very first slide in the thing, and we thought, oh boy, it's going to be what a category. So well done.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. And our 3rd place image is Pleistocene Sand with a score of 83 by Don Jacobson. Don, are you here?
Yes, I am. This was taken on the Central Oregon coast about a year ago. And my wife and I were just looking for a place where we could walk without a lot of people. And we had been to this beach before when we knew that we could escape the pressures of COVID. And we had beautiful light. It was a high, bright overcast, and the winter storms had blown off the top level of sand dunes, uncovering what was a much older formation of sand. And I just love the abstract quality of it.
Don, are you looking down or sideways?
Looking down.
Okay.
How wide of an area left to right are we talking about there?
Well, it was taken with a zoom. It was about 77 millimeters, and it was probably about 30 to 40 feet away.
Wow.
Oh wow! So this is
So
a
you're
rather.
on a cliff then looking down on it.
I was on an opposing sand dune looking down.
Oh wow.
Okay, so we're talking about several feet of width there with the striations.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Because the reason I asked that is sometimes you'll see things similar to that in a real macro, that they're a lot smaller. And the point I wanted to make on that is that in either case, recognizing just that vignette that makes that shot, you know, and that's why I wondered if it was a smaller view that you kind of like homed in on. But again, when we saw this, we were really struck by it. And what I kind of really like, and when we teach composition, I often use the word agony point, because you see how up in the top, it's not that same nice striation. It's all clutter and whatever. And I really like how you added that. But that's the kind of thing that when I'd be composing, I'd be like, gosh, should I put it in or shouldn't I? You know, I'd be agonizing over what to do there. And I think the contrast between that smooth bottom and then that, you know, that top, especially when you then described how the waves had caused that, it was a real neat cerebral choice that you made there, and the beautiful lighting. And it's something that you can you keep on looking at it. You know, it's like a savoring picture. You know, you don't just look at it and it's done.
You know, I think what we just saw, you know, just from the last shot and this shot, is it's the vignette of the scene that really captures the essence of that scene and makes it so much stronger. Now, a lot of people go to the Grand Canyon and take the Grand Canyon, and that is so boring in a way. It's when you go in onto the tighter shots, and both of you finding, you know, the essence, like a pattern inside the larger scene. It's really worked, and great striations, and it's just visually interesting. You can keep looking at it and finding new things.
Yeah.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Second place is Lone Tree by Chris Bartell with a score of 83. Chris, are you here to talk about your image?
Yes, I am. I want to say thank you. I'm honored. This photo was taken in the wintertime at Yellowstone National Park. It was very cold, and with the snow, it was also very bright. So it was hard when you went to go take a picture, because you put your eye up to the viewfinder and it's so dark you can't see it. So sometimes it was really hard to see how the photos turned out. And there were also trees farther on the right, but I wanted to make it more of a simplistic photo with the one lone tree.
Chris, was this down going down into Hayden Valley?
Yes, I believe. I was trying to remember what the name of the valley was. Yeah.
Because why I asked is, for all of you old farts like we are, one of our compatriots in this is John Shaw, and in one of his first books,
It
wasn't this tree, but it's a very similar tree in Yellowstone, in about the same location, and it's just such a strong image. And as you say, and I said it before, simplistic sometimes works, you know, and you can, the lines of the hills covered with the snow just kind of lead you to that spot, and it's just wonderful. I mean, it's just that type of art that simple is good here. And, you know, great job with the exposure, because it can be like, when it's that bright, it can blind you, and trying to find everything with all the blues and shadows and everything can be really hard. So good job.
The thing that this area has been shot. And so there's a real tendency that you could have like a cliche image there. What I really liked about this is the panoramic framing of it, and the blue sky, and the kind of like again, almost an ethereal look rather than a harsh look on it. So there's a huge amount of like softness to that shot, with the exception of the nearest like snowbank. But you have all that softness and monochromatic, and then you have this boom, this tree there that is placed in a good position. I think the cropping that you did there is very insightful, to make something that otherwise could have been just, as I'm sure you've seen, just a lot of like trees and snow.
Yeah, and it's like a third, and then you've got the tree, which is all, you know, that middle third, all those lines just lead right to that point. So
yeah, this in a Yellowstone book could be split right in half as a double page spread of Yellowstone in winter.
Good job.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your comments. And I looked at it in black and white, and I liked the blue coldness
I do
better
I
too.
do
than
too.
black and white.
I do too,
Yeah.
definitely.
All right, wonderful. Great conversation. Our first place is Eye of the Wave by Jan Eckloff with a score of 88.
Yeah, this was taken in December at Cape Disappointment during King Tide. And I used my Nikon D500 with the 80 to 400 lens, 2,000th of a second. And I just liked how it formed the eye shape. And I did some adjustments in Photoshop to bring out the details and the backlighting color. And I did darken down a little bit at the top.
When when this came up, Joe and I both go, wow.
Yeah, we thought that was the winner.
Yeah, it was just so visually powerful and so visually strong, and, I think what you did up top to kind of blacken out the top, which brings your eye into that yellow eye of that wave. It's just amazing. It's just really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, and probably the time of day that you shot this really enhanced because you have the lower light that's creating that eye, I suspect.
Mhm.
But it's not your classic wave.
Mm-mm.
It's so unique in that way. So people see thousands and thousands and thousands of waves and probably shoot, millions of shots of that. But that is that's a standalone. That's I want you next high tide to go back and duplicate that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I mean, that's how unique that is.
Yeah, thank you.
So really well done. I mean, all four were great, but I have to say there were two other shots that I really liked myself. One was that it was kind of like a water scene with all the lightning. It was one of the very first shots. And I thought, there was a lot into that shot. And then the one that we really liked as well was
A bunch of driftwood on the beach, and then in the lower right-hand corner, there was an eagle.
Yeah, there was an eagle in the lower part and a driftwood, and then the forest kind of like stacked off in the background. And that was one that I really thought was up there in that needed an honorable mention because they were both great shots. But there were a lot of really wonderful things. And for those of you that may not have scored real high on stuff, you might want to think about. I hate the idea of fixing something in Photoshop. That we're photographers, we're not computer people. But the raw converter can do a lot to enhance an image, as the wave shot just showed. It didn't take anything away from the veracity, the truth of that image, but it made it an even more striking, beautiful image. So good job, you guys.
Everybody.
All right, and thank you to all of our entrants, our artists who submitted their images into the scenic category. Colleen, did you want to take a little break or shall we move on?
That's up to you, Mary. How do you feel?
I'm fine. How about Joe and Marianne? What do you think?
Do this.
Let's keep going.
We're excited.
Good. We're into it.
All right. Sounds good. So let's continue on to our last category, which is the wildlife category. This is one of our most popular categories. We had 77 images that were judged. So first you'll see the image followed by the score and the title. All right, and that's the end of our wildlife images. Wonderful, wonderful pictures. Let's move on to talk about the top 4 scoring wildlife images. In 4th place, we have burrowing owl with a score of 87 by Mark Svensson. It doesn't appear that Mark is here, but just to be sure, are you here, Mark? All right, we'll ask then for Joe and Marianne to add their comments to this image.
First, before we start, I have to say we've been very amused with some of the titles you all have come up with. Very creative and really funny at times. So that was kind of fun.
And also regarding that, as wildlife photographers, I wish some of the particularly the birds were actually identified as to what they were, because as wildlife photographers, if we're doing wildlife, let's have the respect for the animals that we know what they are. And there were a couple that were misidentified or not named, and that's being a pet peeve and a whiner here, but that's who I am. And but you know, the more you know about your subject too, the better off you'll be as a photographer too. So take the time to identify what they are, and you'll learn more, and you'll be a better shooter for it. So Marianne.
Go ahead.
Well, tremendous amount of detail there. It's you know, you're driven right to those eyes, and compelling composition the way it's done there. That I'm sure that bird, you had the whole body there too. So a good choice for how it was cropped, and I like the fact that the lighting was so soft there. You can see even in the eye highlights that it's an overcast day, so it's there's no shadows involved. And we often think as photographers we have to have bright sunlight or whatever, and that would have ruined that shot. So very well done. And again, you can look at that for a long time and just appreciate all that feather detail and stuff.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. And in 3rd place, we have Three Amigos with a score of 88 by Mike Baines. Mike, are you here?
Yes, I am. I went to Yellowstone this past February. I wasn't able to see wolves close enough to shoot in the wild, but these guys were in the interpretive center at West Yellowstone. Watched them for quite a while. I'm in a building, they're outside. I'm shooting through glass. If anyone has a technique for getting rid of reflections in glass, I'd love to hear it. But these guys were...
Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, these guys were so beautiful. I mean, they were so, you know, gorgeous animals, and I was drawn to the eyes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the only thing you can do when shooting through a glass, because we've done some in aquarium situations and stuff, just get your lens as close to the glass as possible, and hopefully the sun is not within that you're picking up any flare coming from a sun or any type of a light source onto the glass. Otherwise it's really tough. But you almost have to shoot straight out the glass. You have to, not at any angle with your lens, straight on, and you can usually eliminate much of it.
Yeah, you know, sometimes a polarizer might cut even perhaps a not visible to your eye sense of reflection or haze, a polarized, but with a telephoto lens, which you're probably using there, you probably don't have a polarizer big enough for it. And these days, we don't see any lenses that have those drop-in filter polarizers that back 20 years ago were part of the thing.
Mike, on your post-processing, did you use the dehaze slider?
Yes, I did a little bit, and a lot of clarity.
Yeah, because that will help too.
That'll help. That's why I wondered.
Yeah. And one other point regarding that with the post-processing for people, there were several shots that I thought either the dehaze or the highlight slider that is in both the bridge raw converter and also in Lightroom. And if you slid that down, you'd reduce some of the highlight. Maybe that would even help here in just kind of cutting that a little bit more. You're right, the eyes have it on this. You know, you just look from one to another there, and real nice composition with all the ears in and the chins in, and I like that little bit of airspace on the right-hand side of the white wolf. So really well done. It's
Yeah, and we're not averse to shooting captive animals like this, because it was images like this that helped bring the wolf back to Yellowstone and get people loving the wolf for the reintroduction. And I think this is very well done, and it's beautiful. I mean, and like you said, you just go from eye to eye to eye, and you've got great detail on the face and the fur and stuff. So, you know, I like what you did here. It's good.
Yeah, when you first said, you know, you were at Yellowstone, I was like, oh my God, how in the world, how lucky were you? But, you know, there was another shot in that portfolio where a wolf pack was coming down the road. And I know a couple of people that we know were there when that was happening. And that was like a once in a lifetime opportunity like that. So you're out there in the field often enough, you might get lucky. I haven't, but again, really a charming picture. It's very, very nice.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Our second place image has a score of 88, and it's titled "I Am Pretty" by Thomas Detlefsen. Thomas, are you here?
I'm here.
What can you tell us about this image?
Oh, this was taken last year at a little nature park, and this little hummingbird kept coming to the same branch over and over, and I must have taken 500 shots, and this one was the best.
It is I was gonna say, it is a stunning image, because to get the colors and the iridescence in that gorget is just amazing. And what a tribute to this little guy, because I mean, as we all know, they buzz so much. And if you can find a perch like that and be ready to get shots like this, I love perched hummingbirds. I mean, we've shot them for years and years with the multi-flash and in flight, but I love this shot. The colors are great, you know, great lighting for the whole thing, but to like I said, catch that iridescence, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and not taking away from you saying that you shot like 500 shots of this thing. The thing with the gorget on a hummingbird is, just like my hand right now is catching the light a little bit differently, just a slight change in its posture, and you don't get that color there. So shoot it until you get it, you know, and you did there, and it might take 500 shots to really nail it. But that overcast light there caught that iridescence just perfectly, and with the blown out background there, really draws your eye to that bird and the color. So that's really one of the most outstanding. I would imagine that's a Rufus hummingbird shots that I've ever seen. Yeah, really beautiful. Well done.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And first place is also by Thomas. Has a score of 91, and it is titled "Endless Struggle." So Thomas, what can you tell us about this image?
Well, that was taken at a little side arm of the Fraser River, and it's full of dead salmon and, of course, a ton of eagles. But to get a shot like this is really difficult because, as you know, when you have a 500 or 600 millimeter lens, your depth of field is very, very shallow. And I got really lucky on this one. This took a lot of tries too. But I'm very happy with this one.
I would be too. This is what action you know, Joe and I are more wildlife photographers. That's kind of our expert. That's what we're looked at, expertise and stuff. And to capture action like this, behavior like this, both of them parallel to each other at a fast shutter speed, because with the fast shutter speed, you have to be shooting at a shallower depth of field, and great stop in the action. And you said about centering it, but quite honestly, the fastest autofocus point on all of our cameras is in the center. So having it centered, there's nothing wrong with that, but wow, what a great effort, great capture.
Yeah, it kind of as you're very well aware, like F8 and B there, you know, you have to put in the time, and like you said, you shot a lot of pictures, and there's a lot of work involved with that. And if you hang in there and you're tenacious, you can, if you're lucky too, and then you have the skill to capitalize on that opportunity. They say luck is a a combination of preparedness and opportunity. And you were prepared, you had everything right, and got a really graphic image there. Very, very, very nice.
It takes a lot of trips and a little bit of luck.
Well,
there's always a little bit of luck, because you can go there on another day and the clouds come in and you don't have the light, or the birds just finished eating everything and nobody's doing anything. So there's always that involved, and you have to recognize that as a photographer, that you know, there's always that, but then you have to have the skill to capitalize on it. And
the reaction time and be right at the right spot. So that was good.
Yeah. If I can just say one thing that I was thinking about that regarding one, how wonderful that shot is with the peak action there. And so often when you see it and then you react, it's too late. You know, you've missed that absolutely nailed shot, and you got it here. And we have been accused of being cheaters now, because when I was telling you about that Olympus Pro Capture feature on that, the camera will continue to focus, and when you fire, even if you're slow, like I'm slow, and I missed that peak action when the camera actually recorded, the Pro Capture feature can catch that. So I think we're going to see over time some really dynamic images by people that are less talented, and yet they still get the shot.
Yeah, so kudos to you for getting this straight on, firing fast, and having the focus and everything.
Yeah, well done. I mean, I love the eye contact between the two birds there and stuff. One other, again, just we would be remiss to not say that we were also struck quite a bit by that wildebeest.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, another of our favorites was that wildebeest image with the two, and then kind of going back into duster.
It was
to
almost
obscurity.
a panorama in kind of a black and white. It scored fairly high, and it was also a very good shot. There were a lot of great shots there, but the four
we were
winners
envious.
yeah.
So
Well done, everybody.
Everybody very well done on all three categories. It's very inspiring and humbling for us, because there's so much talent, as we've seen with all of you, that we're not professionals anymore, so to speak. I mean, we are enjoying all of your art and all of your photography. And like I said, we're humbled, and it inspires us to get out there and try to do the same. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Joe.
You
and
could have seen
Marianne.
twice as many pictures of all these categories, by the way. They were fun.
Wonderful. Yes, I agree. We have fantastic creativity and talent in this group. So much appreciated for everybody's efforts, your entrant submissions, as well as for the judges who took the time to go through all of these images. So I will hand the meeting back over to Larry and Colleen for a few closing remarks.
Wow, what a wonderful morning. The submissions were just fantastic. Appreciated seeing all of them. And Joe and Marianne, you have a lot to say, and I'm hoping that in the future sometime you guys can be the invited speakers at an in-person meeting that we'll look forward to sometime in the future. And we would ask that not everybody who's in the Northwest even knows that we exist. But if on any of your tours or anything, you have some people from the Northwest, mention, if you can remember, that we exist, and that we would sure enjoy having having them join us.
We'll do.
That would,
But everybody else, I wanted people to know.
But we can do it too.
that would be very helpful. So the only thing that I have to announce is that we again are being optimistic, but I'm hoping that we've said this before. We're hoping that our next meeting, the first Saturday in November, will be an in-person meeting. We have a sponsor. Tamron will be the sponsor. Chris Ballmer will be the invited speaker. We'll be meeting at Centralia College in Centralia, Washington. The only thing that's kind of out of the ordinary is that while we typically have a few door prizes, we have a very special door prize courtesy of Tamron, we think, for that meeting. Tamron is going to make its one of its 150 to 500 lenses that's received a lot of attention as a door prize. So somebody who attends the meeting will go away with especially happy face next time, hopefully.
I would just like to close too with a comment from one of our members, Abbott. He says he would sure like to know that if we do have a live meeting, that we could also Zoom it. And what I can tell you about that is that's going to take a little bit of technical know-how. And so if any of you are interested in that or know how to do that, we'd sure want to hear from you, because I would not even be there present. So yes, I would love to see a Zoom meeting, since I will be in Arizona again by then. So keep that in mind too. We'd be looking for a way that we could Zoom a meeting when we're having a live meeting for those that can't make it live. So with that, I think we'll end our meeting. Any further comments from anyone?
I should mention that our organization really runs on volunteers, that and in short supply of volunteers. Mary Pinion has new family responsibilities that are going to make it difficult for her to continue. So we're going to need somebody to self-nominate themselves as the vice president to be in charge of the competitions at our next meeting. And if we were to have Zoom option continue, that's going to require more volunteers, because we haven't done that in the past. We're looking for people who are able to step forward and make a contribution, that without a large number of volunteers, we just simply couldn't have these meetings.
Something. We really enjoyed seeing everyone's photos. We thank you guys for your attendance, and it was really a great opportunity to share photography and what we could impart for you guys, but certainly enjoyed the whole experience. It was, as Mary said, seeing the portfolios or the images from the competition was really a lot of fun and very inspiring. But
thank you for inviting us to do this. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. And I hope sometime we can get out there and do something like this live, or for a weekend or something, because it's
we love sharing and teaching.
And thank you all for attending. See you next time. Bye-bye.